director of the Institute of Epidemiology, and Heather Zentra Munich. And he has also more than 700 publications and has been involved in numerous national and international epidemiology research projects examining common chronic disease, especially the relationship between air pollution and respiratory health. He has been actively working in several international projects, such as ENCORE, ESCAPE, and in Paris. The talk that Dr. Heinrich will share with us is exposure to green space and greenness and the health outcome. Please join me to welcome Professor Heinrich.
Good morning to everybody. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me. It is really a pleasure for me to be here, not only to experience the friendship and the friendliness and the open-mindedness of the local people. In addition, it is also a pleasure for me to stay a while in the hometown of one of my doctoral students, Shimei Chen, and she told me a lot about Taipei and Taipei, and so I could make my own experience, which is very fortunate for me. Today I will try to direct your attention again to green stuff. This is simply an extension of one of the presentations by Professor Xu yesterday. He was talking about forest gardening, and I will try to dive in this topic a little bit deeper. So the outlook is, I will start with my own motivation to do green research. We'll continue with some differentiation between green space and greenness. There's a difference between both labels and both terms. How to assess exposure to green space and greenness in epi-studies. And then I will give you a very brief overview. What is the current status of the art on the results on green space, greenness exposure, and the broad spectrum of health outcomes. I will talk about potential underlying mechanisms, and finally come up with a few conclusions. Let's start with my motivation. There's a common belief that about therapeutic effects of exposure to greenness mainly goes back to ancient time in Japan. Forest bathing is a label which is specifically known in Japan. And so there are, however, recently we have developed a rapid increase of attention of GIS, Geographic Information System data, and here, and the GPS, Geographic Positional System technologies, and data is also available from processed and raw satellite images, enables a more objective assessment of the exposure to nature. And there's an emerging evidence on potential health benefits. Actually, it is just association. We consider that as potential health benefits from green environments, from epi-studies in adults, but also a few in children. And finally, my motivation is also driven by the fact that it might be easier to launch a tree planting policies in cities than to reduce emissions and toxicants, and also to intervene with some behavioral aspects, not to use your own car instead of them just walking in the park. And finally, in environmental epidemiology, but also in environmental medicine, we all have to take care for the dirt and for the chemicals, for the dirt stuff. And this is a nice example where we could share some good news with some others, even with the public. And this is also important when we are talking to the public. Let's start with the green space. Why green space? and greenness research in public health is needed. There's an increasing number of mainly cross-sectional but also a few longitudinal studies which looked at the association between green exposure and health within the past 5 years, mostly. These studies are using mental health indicators, cognitive function, but also pregnancy outcomes and mortality. And the second point is, in particular, very important. It was projected within a couple of decades that 80% of our world population is living in metropolitan areas. The urbanization is one of the mega trends worldwide, and we have to cope, we have to start thinking what does it mean today. And the next one is related to the emerging technologies. For the exposure assessment, there are freely, no-cost available satellite-derived images of very high resolution. Detailed land use databases are available for most parts of the world, and etc. And finally, this one is also important when you're trying to do meta-analysis or combining results from different studies. Most of the studies in air pollution epidemiology so far using different metrics for the exposure assessment. And one identical assessment strategy for the exposure to greenness is highly warranted. And when you are using the satellite-derived images here, you can apply these identical methods in exposure assessment, which makes your life very easy or much less difficult compared to previous strategies and previous approaches when doing meta-analysis. However, the mechanisms are not fully understood. It was suggested greenness might be related to stress relief, might be related to facilitated social interactions, also increased physical activity, reduce environmental exposures, and etc. Let's start with the green space. How we define green space in relation to greenness. Green space is land that is partly or completely covered with grass, trees, shrubs, or other vegetations. However, the type of green space is very difficult. It's very different. Even within urban green space, there's a lot of difference between urban settings of green space. It is different from natural green space, and it's certainly also different from green space for agricultural use. Greenness. Green space is not equally vegetated, but a few pictures from the city of Munich and some parks in the city of Munich. And greenness is the general level of vegetation both in structured green space and in unstructured, like backyards, gardens, street lines, or trees. So green space and greenness is not the same. Even when you are using the label green space, you should know what you are talking about. And this is extremely important to improve the exposure and also to a better understanding what is behind the entire green stuff I will talk about. When you are doing epi-studies, it is very easy to collect information by questionnaires on subjective or perceived green space exposure. We could easily ask for the walking distance to green space from your residencies. It is easy to ask about the quality characteristics of green space as well as neighborhood characteristics in terms of safety, maintenance, and even aesthetical features might be important for that. Use of green space as well as neighborhood is important, and you can collect easily by questionnaire data on that. Whether this is sufficient or not, it is an open question, and certainly objective measures are helpful for better understand what we are talking about, and the modern technologies would allow to assess in a different way accessibility to green space. Using GIS data, you can simply calculate distance to the next park or larger parks. The general level of residential vegetation could be also assessed using GIS data. We could collect data on residential distances to structured green, and we could also collect information using GPS information on time spent in green spaces, frequency spent in green spaces, as well as the neighborhood. So that means the key part of the exposure assessment is related to residential address. You need the residential address. And even better if you have the complete residential geography, so which would allow to come up with a life course exposure-related approach. This one is not, it can be easily written, but has also some implication on data privacy, which is a concern in several countries. But nevertheless, addresses have to be geocoded. If you are using geocode in your data set is not anonymized anymore, because you can recalculate from the geocoded addresses, and so this would allow you to identify a subject, which is a privacy-related problem. Greenness in relation to satellite images, we are using the Landsat satellite images. You have to select a cloud-free day, which is a challenge for some area, which allows you to assess, to find spatial contrast. In Greenness stuff, we are interested in the spatial contrast. We are less interested in the temporal changes. So we are selecting vegetation-rich season, identifying one cloud-free day, and study what the spatial contrast looks like. And Greenness could be assigned for different buffer zones. These are very common buffer zones. Our preference is on 500-meter buffer zones, because this is the action area for a pregnant woman, for instance, when you are interested in studying pregnancy outcomes. For the green space, you can use land use databases, which are available in Europe, but for many other areas worldwide. And in addition, Urban Atlas for some specific cities or smaller areas. And then you can calculate the proportion or the presence of different types of greenness, as well as the distance to them from the residential address. Again. So we'll show you a few examples. Let's start with Germany. This is how Germany looks like. This is Munich, and this is the capital, this is Berlin. We can use the Corinne database. This is a land use, public available land use database, and we can come up with some estimate. This is the city, the border of the city of Munich. You can come up with some estimates for green forests and also green parks for the city of Munich. And you can also use an urban atlas, again, for the city of Munich. This is for those of you who visited Munich already. There's a small river along, and along the side of the small river there's some green parks and a little forest. You can use urban atlas again, and to calculate as well green spaces, to identify green spaces for these areas, and how could be used, these databases, to assess, to measure the exposure. You can calculate accessibility. You can use the percentages, the proportion of land covered with green in a certain buffer zone. You could also, so this is the midpoint of one residential address, and you can calculate the percentage adding by the smaller dark green areas. These are forests, and the light green areas representing parks. You can calculate the percentage of parks and forests to come up with an estimate of the greenness exposure, or just simply use the Euclidean distance to green space. So also the combination of geographic information system data and GPS data could be used. This is the track record of one guy who is walking in the city, and then this information, this track information, could be used and could be linked to to other databases like ambient air pollution maps or noise maps to come up with a time and space variant exposure scenario. How to measure exposure to greenness? We have two basic approaches. One is related to tree canopy cover. There are urban atlas or showing you the tree canopy, and again you can calculate the proportion within different buffer zones for tree canopy. And the other one is the vegetation indices, NDVI. I will talk a little bit more in detail on that. This is a map for the NDVI for the city of Munich. Again, the reddish color is indicating the built environment. The greenish is more related to forests and parks. How NDVI is composed? NDVI is strongly related to chlorophyll activity. We know that chlorophyll strongly absorbs visible light, and because it is used for photosynthesis, and the cell structure of the leaves strongly reflects near infrared light. And so we could calculate the difference and normalize the difference between the sum up of the near infrared light and the red light, and this comes up with this index, which is called normalized difference vegetation index. It is based on the surface reflectance obtained from remote sensing imagery. The interpretation is, it is an indicator for green biomass density. It is an indicator for vegetation intensity. It ranges by definition between -1 and 1, while -1 stands for water surfaces, and close to 1 it stands for tropical rainforest, and here something in between, it is metropolitan areas which are mixed between built environment and green parks and gardens and other green spaces. So again, the NDVI is a reflection issue and an absorption issue caused by chlorophyll. So NDVI source of calculation, we are using the Landsat 5 thematic mapper, which are freely available with a resolution of 30 meters by 30 meters. There are even higher resoluted maps available, but nevertheless, for our purposes, I guess this resolution is fine enough. So we could, the challenge and crucial part is to identify a cloud-free satellite image, which is not easy. You have to search these databases a lot to identify one day which allow you to identify a cloud-free day which gives us a number for the spatial contrast for our study area. And we did a study in south of Germany, which goes close to the Alpine area, which have different climatic conditions. And so we could develop the NDVI index for a specific subject with a specific residential address. We can come up an allocation of an NDVI indicator, NDVI number for each of the addresses. So this is a map of our study area, how it looks like. So these are the distribution of the normalized difference vegetation index. The more green it is, the higher the vegetation is. The more red there's almost no vegetation, and the reddish area here, these are the lakes. This one is the city border of Munich, and then you see the brownish color here, which stands for some vegetation, stands for some built space. Again, you can use residential addresses, and around these residential addresses, which is approximately here, you can calculate the average on NDVI for each subject. Green space and greenness and health. Let's start with pregnancy outcomes. There was even a systematic review with a meta-analysis. They could include 8 studies with more than 200,000 newborns. 4 studies were settled in Europe, 3 in US and 1 in Asia. And greenness was defined as NDVI in most of the studies. And this is a big advantage of these new technologies, to come up with one identical assessment of the exposure. And this is the number, how the data looks like. And these are the 8 studies. And you see that all the effects the associations between NDVI and birth weight are above 0. So that means, with the exception of one Spanish study, all the studies showed rather consistent increased birth weight. The increased birth weight are just minor. This is on average 30 grams. Whether this has any clinical meaning, it is highly questionable. This is again a population approach. But if you're looking at birth rate for those mothers who smoke during pregnancy and compared to the birth rate to those mothers who did not smoke, this is a similar level. It is 60 grams. It is also minor elevated or minor decreased birth rate in smoking mothers during pregnancy. And we know very well a low birth weight has also an impact for a higher catch-up growth. It's a stronger peak rate velocity during the first month of life. And these higher peak velocities in growing, and peak rate velocity in particular, has an impact on chronic disease development 30 years later. And so I would feel a little bit cautious and hesitating to come up with too fast conclusion whether this has a meaning or not. So we have to be careful. At the moment, all these studies, or most of these studies, showed a coherent increased birth rate with exposure to genes. When I saw the first paper published by the Spanish group, I thought it is rubbish, I have to say. Because why green space should have an impact on birth rate? Birth rate is such a complex issue. So many factors are related to birth rate. Why a little bit more green in the neighborhood should impact the birth rate? And therefore I asked Joachim Heinrich, one of my doctoral students, just look at our own data, whether we could replicate, or actually my intention was to falsify these studies. And what we found was absolutely the same, and this was published here. This is our paper here. And another point which thrilled me a little bit to this one was the primary results on the potential effect modification by socioeconomic status. This study here, that one, this study found also that the less well-off part of our population had a stronger benefit from green. And we also looked at a social stratification by social factors. and we found absolutely the same. That means a social factor has a mediating effect, and 3 out of these studies looked at a potential effect modification by socioeconomic status, and they found one. 3 out of the few they have looked at. And our interpretation was that those who are rich, who are born in a rich family, they could cope even with a not favorable direct residential environment. Those who are poor, they could not afford to travel to a more luxurious space, a more relaxing space with more green. This was our speculation about these findings. But nevertheless, the social potential effect modification is always an interesting stuff when you're talking about environmental justice and other points as well. These studies are all cautiously adjusted for key determinants of birth rate, like smoking during pregnancy, even environmental tobacco smoke, and also some other factors. However, most of the studies did not adjust for noise, did not adjust for vegetation type and use of vegetation, and so there's also some room left for more specific interpretation. Let's move on to residential greenness and mental health. There are much more studies. A total of 28 studies were identified and were used for this systematic review. Even 7 longitudinal studies were published so far, 20 cross-sectional studies, and 1 ecological type studies. 8 again in UK. UK is very strong on that, Tony. This is also related on the database, available databases, but also 5 in the Netherlands, 4 in US. And so the size of these studies are different, but very different, even the range. But nevertheless, some of them are really big studies which would allow to carefully adjust for several potential other confounders. Most of the studies are in adults, but there are also a few studies in children are available. They are using strengths and difficulty questionnaire inventory. This has the subdomains of emotional problems, a subdomain on attention deficit, inattention disorder, and some other subdomains. So the general health and stress and psychiatric disorders was also used, and again NDVI, this is the fancy index, was used for the assessment of the exposure. Let's have a look at the results. Surrounding greenness in adults, all the 3 longitudinal studies found 3 out of 3 showed beneficial effect. And for cross-sectional studies, 9 out of 14 showed also beneficial effects. No effects were reported for 5 out of the 14, and no single study reported detrimental effects. For children, there are no studies. I'm showing that the majority, this is just a very rough evaluation, the majority showed a beneficial effect. This could be true, or could be publication bias. It always needs a little bit more time when some authors are brave enough to publish results against the 3. And so when an emerging issue came up, more or less smaller studies came up with strong effects, then the bigger studies are followed with a little bit smaller effects, and it takes a while to for that a study is reporting as well the other way around. So this is not the end of the day, and this is certainly not the end of the studies on greenness and mental health. Access to green space, again, a little bit less studies, 2 out of 4 beneficial, 2 out of the 4 no effects, again, no detrimental effect. For children, 3 out of the 4 are beneficial effects. Again, we might run and bias this publication activities here. But nevertheless, the authors concluded there is limited evidence for a causal relationship in adults, inadequate evidence in children. So they are very conservative, very restrictive, which is fine, or through the empirical data, the association data, which gives you another entire picture on that topic. But nevertheless, I like the more cautious evidence because we need certainly more studies, in particular on the type of the vegetation. There's a lot of points which were not solved yet. Even when you are studying mental health problems in children, you cautiously have to assess as well the parental psychopathology, which is completely missed in those studies. Because when you're doing the study in children, it is not so easy to ask the parents about their own psychiatric problems and disorders. So there is also some important uncertainties within the studies, and this makes the authors a little bit reluctant to come up with a strong statement here. This is my slide on the overview of the health outcome. Let's start with the birth rate. This is my personal evaluation criteria. The maximum is 3+. So for the birth rate, it is a rather consistent finding, and even after the meta-analysis, I showed you the results. There was another paper published this year, again supporting the notion that NDVI is related to a higher birth rate. For other birth outcomes, it is the results are a little bit mixed. For weight status, it is also a little bit mixed. But for mental health, the epidemiology, the associational studies, gave a rather consistent signal, which is also supported by some recent papers which were not included in the systematic review. School performance could be, behavioral development could be one association, survival and cardiovascular disease effects. They are very nice and elegant papers, but only very few of them. It is plus, maybe plus and a question mark, diabetes. This one is a Taiwanese study. I guess we have heard yesterday about that. There is something going on, and we have recently got accepted a paper where we looked at NDVI and insulin resistance in children, where we also found a signal. But when we adjust for air pollution, then the signal was attenuated, not statistically significant anymore. I will talk later on that. But nevertheless, for diabetes, there might be as well the association. Allergic disease is very interesting because my background and my main interest is asthma and allergic diseases. And I will show you a little bit more on that. And self-perceived health, a very strong, consistent signal, but self-perceived health is always a little bit, could be affected by reporting bias. A lot of other bias possibilities have to be considered when you are evaluating self-perceived health, in particular when you're doing applying cross-sectional study design. NDVI and allergies. For allergic health outcomes, the role of green environment might be even more complex because it could be beneficial, greater exposure to a number and a higher diversity of microbes. This is the biodiversity hypothesis, which is considered to be beneficial to avoid the development of allergies. It could be detrimental, exacerbation of symptoms, and among those, sensitized due to exposure to pollen-releasing plants and fungi. The influence of the exposure timing is also difficult because the allergic diseases starts very early in life, maybe even prenatally. And so the influence of the exposure time is extremely important and needs to be considered when you are looking at the association with allergic diseases. And I will show you, no studies on lung function were published so far. I will show you a recent multi-center study where we could combine data from 7 birth cohorts. So the first one is, each of the cohorts showed a statistically significant signal when you are looking NDVI, identical measure, and allergic rhinitis. But the direction is different. When we saw the first time these results, we thought, okay, we might run into a problem with the coding system using R. Could happen. But then we double-checked again and again, and the birds and the heterogeneous picture stayed. So that means we found some studies which had beneficial effects of NDVI in relation to the onset of allergic rhinitis through the first 8 years of life, and in some other studies we have a beneficial effect. These studies showed there are 2 points which need to be mentioned here. When you're looking at these abundant studies from Sweden, this covers mainly Stockholm, this is a metropolitan area, and it is similar like our study in the south. This is mainly Munich, this is both our metropolitan areas, where we found a detrimental effect. And this study, CUP study, a Canadian study, and Genie-Lisa North, this is very close to the Dutch border. It is a highly rural area, and the Dutch PIAMA study covered as well 1/3 of the entire country, including a lot of rural spaces. And so this figure could be interpreted, should be very cautious, could be interpreted as well on the rural-urban background. And another important part, which is what we could learn here from this figure is, if you're doing green stuff research in one study, you could be completely misled. This is the most important part. You need more studies in different climatic conditions, maybe in different urban and rural settings, to come up with this, to see whether the reported associations are stable in different areas. This one is therefore extremely important, and one study, one NDVI study in one location could you completely mislead. I will talk a little bit about our hypothesis, the underlying hypothesis between green environments and health indicators. There are several candidates. One is related that green environments are related to less ambient air pollution concentrations, even the noise levels are reduced. There are rather good data on that. Even there are good data on heat mitigation, and there are some data that show that physical activity is higher when you're living very close to green park. It is less related to the vegetation index, which is plausible, but it is related to accessibility to green space. And also the green space is related to social interactions here. And also there are some little data that green environment, in particular parks in your neighborhood, could reduce your stress load. And these factors are known to have an impact on health indicators, and the question is whether these factors are mediating the green environment effect on the health indicators. One important point I have forgotten, and this one is the socioeconomic status, which is extremely important when you are studying greenness effects, because everybody of us would prefer, if you would have the choice to rent a home or to buy a home in a green environment or in a very dense environment, then the choice is yours and you probably select the green one. And so, and those who can't cope in terms of financial resources or other resources with the green part of the city, they have to live in the less green part. And so there is a very strong interrelationship here. But even that association is not equal across different locations and across different metropolitan areas. Just an example for Amsterdam. Those who are well off are living in the city center, and they have a lower exposure to green. And this is the same as in Stockholm. Stockholm, they are the rich ones have a higher probability to live in the city center. They are exposed to higher levels of ambient air pollution, and like in Amsterdam. So it is a different issue. This could be completely different in other cities and other metropolitan areas. But it is extremely important, and while the urbanization degree, this might also have an impact on several health indicators. Coming back to these potential mediating proposed factors. When you're looking at some studies try to study whether these air pollution effects could reduce the supposed green environment effects by additional adjustment. I just mentioned our own study where we looked at diabetes, and we found that the effect on insulin resistance, it is mainly driven by the exposure to ambient air pollution. But other studies on birth weight showed very consistent that the effects reported for green environments are robust against adjustment for air pollution. I haven't seen so far a study which adjusted for each of these factors, so we could also think that this might be a combination for that. Physical activity is another option. There is some indication which shows a mild reduction of the greenness effect, but in general the greenness environment, the greenness effect stayed and remained even after adjustment for physical activity. Physical activity is difficult to assess. Even if you are using objective data, this gives you not the final answer on the average physical activity. But even access to green space might be related to physical activity. There is some indication, but the indication is not strong enough that we could come up with a conclusion that what is related to green and the health outcome is mainly driven by the physical activity. For social interaction is more or less the same. Only little data is available on that, whether there is a mediation effect, and this is also the case for stress. It's plausible, but the data are not sufficient. For socioeconomic status, this is, and therefore I'm trying to make a very strong point on that. There's always the potential of residual confounding, because even if you are doing your very best to adjust for educational level, for income, for neighborhood level, even then there is some potential left for residual confounding. And so we, at the moment, some of the reported greenness and what we call potential health effects could be simply methodological bias by socioeconomic status. At the moment, I'm open as well for this hypothesis. Underlying mechanisms for greenness are not clear, are not solved yet. We have to do much more. And I will summarize my talk and come up with a few conclusions. Exposure to greenness and its potential health impact is an emerging research topic. This is for sure the case. Several descriptive observational studies show beneficial health effects when subjects are exposed to more green. The underlying mechanisms are not clear at all, and residual confounding is not unlikely. More data is needed on vegetation type, usage of green space. More experimental studies could clarify the role of greenness and the greenness exposure. Regardless these uncertainties and the knowledge gaps, city planners should be more aware on potential positive aspects on green in cities now. This is my final slide, and I would like to thank you, at least Jana, for her collaboration, and also Jesse.
So important for all of us. And before the Q&A, so we might have some time for one or two questions. A little bit tight, but probably one question or one comment. Yes, please.
Fascinating, actually. I had one question, which is, I wondered about this NDVI index, because in some cities it might be reflecting everybody has a garden with trees in it and there's no public space. In other areas it might be there is only public space, but from space they both look, 50% green. And that may account for the heterogeneity in using NDVI as an index. Is it possible?
Yes. Short answer. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, the same I think about the temporal part, because there are countries where the seasons are much longer green, and other locations where it's green all year round. You said you didn't look really much or find really much about the temporal aspect?
What we did is we selected the season with the richest vegetation intensity and tried to use these vegetation season to come up with a measure for the spatial contrast. So most of the green stuff is based on spatial contrast. It's not on temporal tables. But what we can also do is we could study moving activities and see what does it mean in terms of the exposure to green. Moving might be a very nice and elegant strategy to come up a little bit with the natural changes of the exposure. Moving might be a good idea, and what we could also do is we could retrospectively assess the exposure going back to, let's say, 20 years, because the NDVI maps are available from the beginning of the 80s, which is very, very nice. The same maps, more or less the same maps. The resolution is not so high as it is nowadays, but nevertheless the idea, the underlying mechanism, the underlying principle is the same, and this is certainly not true for ambient air pollution. When you are trying to extrapolate to the past, you always run into problems, right? And this is less the case for the NDVI.
Yeah, another question is, I see all these studies are related to residual where people are living, but during daytime when it's light, most of these people, if they have a job, they are somewhere else where there is another vision on green, and I don't see many studies that take that into account. Should we not do that more and look also at workplaces and what is the view of people during the daylight time towards green?
Thank you for this question. This is certainly an open question. It's an open question from the air pollution epidemiology. We have learned that if you are staying a lot of your time in schools and workplace, if you add these locations to your exposure models, it doesn't affect. So the idea is good. The idea is good for ambient air pollution epidemiology. It doesn't work. I have no idea whether it works here for greenness or not. Could be. No idea. And also the indoor greenness. The indoor greenness, there's no studies on that. Absolutely no. It will take a while. Interpretation is also important. And it is also an open question whether this is the green color or whether this is accessibility to green park.
I think there's also some data that people who have an own garden, they use less public green spaces.
Could be. Thank you. I'm very open for several suggestions, I have to say.
Yeah, I'd like to bring some of this Asian perspective. I did some study on this, and I'm troubled by this greenness or openness. So if you are in these Asian cities with high population densities, the open space could be good enough for people to have some activities. So I know there's a lot of studies in Europe now and working on this access to green park or the recreation areas or this openness. But I'd like to introduce our guests from US or the European countries. In the morning, if you wake up tomorrow very early and go check our parks, and starting from 5 o'clock, and you will see a lot of people dancing, practicing Tai Chi, in the park or in the open space. And tonight, after we have dinner, you can go to some places and you also see people are dancing, a group of people dancing that's under music. And they not necessarily choosing these parks because parks sometimes put out. And they will choose any big squares that can unofficially occupy. Every day they will be there. They are territory. So all these kind of things you cannot see in Europe or in US. And the kind of social interaction they have, the kind of exercise they are having, that could be very beneficial to health. So in the future, when we want to compile this kind of data, the cultural difference and the living spaces difference will be a factor we have to consider. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Heinrich.
Thank you.